All right, awesome. Well, welcome. This is the Conversations with Chris podcast. This is episode 37, maybe 38, and I got a very special guest, very near and dear to my heart, my personal IronMan training coach, Mr. Tony Rich with Event Horizon. He's a Guinness World Record holder. He's done countless, really, endurance events, and he also hosts a podcast of his own. So happy to have him here. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here. The tables have turned. I'm on the other side of the mic now on the
Yeah,
podcast.
how's that feel?
Yeah, it feels good. I love it.
Yeah, well, I know I want to pick your brain. I know a little bit about your story, but I'm more intrigued than you might think, and I know some of the listeners are. So I appreciate you and appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
So I guess to start, we can just go back to where things started for you. How'd you get into the endurance training? How'd you fall in love with Ironman and triathlon, and what's that journey been like for you? You know, you've coached countless people, you've done countless events yourself. What's that been like?
Yeah, for me, it was sort of an unlikely path. When I came up and grew up, I was always athletic, but I was sort of in high school and through college, I was just sort of athletic, and in high school I played basketball, football, and track, and so I've always been running, but the endurance stuff didn't come later, and it wasn't until 2003, right? I'm dating myself a little bit. This is
No.
Back in the early 2000s, I started to get involved in a local running group. And this was before the running groups were popular. This was probably the only running group, or one of the only running groups in the greater Boston area. And that's when I started to rub elbows with people that started doing marathons. And I was like, oh, maybe this is something that I could do as well. So after, going around and talking to people about it, I was able to, finagle an entry into the Boston Marathon. This was in 2002, 2003.
Yeah.
And so I ran the Boston Marathon for the first time in 2003, and, just on no real training program, just doing it myself.
Yeah.
And running with the running group, and ended up doing it in about 4 hours, and then loved it. Absolutely loved it, and just took to it. And, from there, the seed of endurance sports was planted. And then I immediately got involved in the Ironman triathlon. Someone said, hey, what about this? You ever think about doing this? And immediately I said, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do right there. And trouble was, at that point, I didn't know how to swim. I didn't start swimming until age 30.
Wow.
And, so I had to go to the local YMCA and actually sign up for a class to learn how to swim. And, and so I did the class, and, ended up doing the first triathlon in 2000. I think that was the next year, 2004.
Wow.
And the first triathlon ever was a half Ironman. Just signed up for it.
Let's go. Come on. That's what I'm talking about.
And then that was it, right? So that's where it was born. And then from that point on, I just sort of took off with endurance sports. Done almost 100 marathons, and then the Ironman, and then all of the indoor Ironman and all that stuff came later. But it was just, I sort of just took off with it, and, wanted to learn everything about how bodies move, And then that's when I started to, pick up the books and the science books and figure all that stuff out. So that was the journey at a high level.
Yeah, well, it's awesome, and I'm glad you went on it, because to be connected with you has been a blessing, to say the least. But yeah, you did mention the education now, and one thing that I've noticed about you and appreciate about you is your love for the nutrition side of things. You kind of outline it
Yes.
more than most people, and you have your head wrapped around it. How did that
Yep.
fit into the story? Were you always conscious about your health and your nutrition, or was that something that you realized kind of impacted your performance more than?
Yeah. Early on, I saw that I had to figure out a bunch of things by trial and error, because early on, I didn't know a lot about the underpinnings of nutrition science. I just didn't know a lot. So I figured out a lot by same thing what many new athletes do. They'd start Google and start reading books. So I had to extrapolate all of the knowledge through trial and error, and lots of error, believe me.
Yeah.
Right. I've had a lot of situations where I was like, well, that didn't go right. I wonder if nutrition was the problem there. And then, I figured out a lot by reading, many of the books like Joel Friel and many of the other, triathlon teachers. And, later on, I ended up getting certified though in nutrition, three nutrition certifications.
Yep.
But I think that is really the missing piece that many athletes just sort of oversee, right? And they want to come to the table. All right, let's get to the training. How many miles am I going to be running per week? How many miles am I going to be swimming per week? And I go, okay, yeah, we'll do that. But let's focus on this here, the nutrition, the fueling. All of it has to have a symbiotic relationship with your training. And if you get that right, wow, then you're really ahead of the game if you get the nutrition science right. And some of the things that is important, right, is trying to figure out what's the good nutrition advice from the stuff that just takes you in different directions, right? So you can, on social media, there's a billion people out there that are advocating a billion different things. How do you figure out what's right? How do you figure out what's just, sort of questionable ideas, right? And some of the debates out there in social media about nutrition, they rival politics.
Yeah.
I mean, you see some of the debates going back and forth. So how do you figure out what's the right stuff to what's the stuff that really has a reasonable basis? And that's where your coaches really have to come in and help athletes with this. And so I've focused on trying to do more to help athletes with the nutrition piece, both daily nutrition as well as fueling.
Yeah. Right. And that's a big piece that I've realized and has helped me quite a bit during these long workouts, is the fueling during the workout. I kind of pushed that to the side for a while and gave in recently, and I'm glad I did. But that's good, man. And you mentioned the you mentioned the conflict between certain viewpoints and especially in the health industry. I'm curious what your thoughts are on plant-based and going fully plant-based, because there's big talk out there. It's something that I've been turned on to recently. I'm even considering it, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are. And there are endurance athletes who keep up with it. So I don't know if you have any.
There are many great endurance athletes that are plant-based, that are vegetarian, that are vegan. So the first thing is to figure out, when people say plant-based, what do you mean, right? Because the fact of the matter is, most people are plant-based in that when they eat food, and the food on their plate, half will be, vegetables.
Yep.
Or so sometimes when people say plant-based, they just mean the majority of their food is plant-based, and they might have only small portions that are meat, or they may be what's called a pescatarian, which is fish only or something like that. So any strategy like that in a plant-based strategy can absolutely be high quality and efficient, right? So, and people have ethical reasons for not eating meat, and that fits in. I think plant-based is a viable strategy. I think when it goes to the extreme, is when they're sort of the activists that are saying you should only eat plants, and if you eat anything else but plants, then that will be detrimental to your health, and that'll be detrimental to this and that. So that's where it goes to the extreme. But I think it's fine if people have ethical reasons, right? Because you got to draw an ethical line somewhere. We all draw ethical lines in different places, but I think you can absolutely be a high quality athlete, a high performing athlete on a plant-based strategy, and as long as you know how to supplement your diet with other protein sources, that is also helpful too.
Yeah, that's cool. And how often do you, I had two questions actually. I'm curious about what your diet is like now. I'm also curious about your training routine now.
Yeah.
But I'm also more curious too about how often you would recommend like playing around with your diet and experimenting per se.
Yeah. Well, me personally, right? And so I'm more of a coach now. So so now it's a little different to when I was doing 5-10 events a year. Now I train. I do recreationally. The Boston Marathon is something that I do every year. That's just because it's the hometown race, and then I do that, and I might do one or two other events. So I'm training substantially less than I did, when I was, 28 or,
Right.
So, but I'm still active. I still maintain a series of activities that I try to get in a year. And from a nutrition standpoint, so in our practice, Event Horizon, we have what's called an endurance nutrition system, and it's quite simple. It's just fruits, vegetables, legumes, lean meats insofar as you eat meat, seafood, nuts, seeds, and lean dairy. And that's really the core of the strategy that I employ, and that's really the core of the strategy that we employ with athletes that we take. It's very simple. It's not a fad diet. It's just whole foods that humans have relied on for millennia, right? And so that's really the core of it. But I'm just like everybody else. Once in a while, when I want to grab some pizza and beer too, when I'm out with friends. So the thing is, it's the yo-yoing of the diet, right? That is a challenge, right? So if you have a strategy that works, and you have a strategy that is consistent, and you can employ it, and you try to stick with that, right? And so you can see people again out on social media. Oh, I'm doing the Atkins. Oh, I'm doing the low carb, high fat. I'm doing the ketogenic. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And jumping around in all of those, that can be a challenge. And what we've seen from the evidence is that works less than it actually works. I think employing a strategy just a very simple whole food, healthy food diet, and that's something that you can actually sustain for a long period of time, then that's probably more advisable. And that's what I do, and that's what we do at our recommend to athletes. Yeah,
I got you. That's cool. And then what about like meal timing? And the fasting is big now. I've told you I partake in it once in a while. I'm kind of
yeah.
playing around with it, but what are your thoughts on meal
Oh,
timing and fasting?
yeah. I mean, timing, or what they call intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
So uh, it's all. So in order to lose weight, and oftentimes when people employ these strategies, they're doing it on a weight loss program or weight loss strategy. Any of these methods, timing and such, they're all essentially doing similar things in that they're trying to get a body to accumulate a caloric deficit, right? And so something like intermittent fasting, insofar that it does that, it's doing that. You're getting a caloric deficit, but you're just timing how you're getting the caloric deficit, right? Someone can try to just eat 400 fewer calories per day, or they can fast for certain hours, right? Either way, I mean, both those strategies are essentially trying to do the same thing, trying to accumulate caloric deficits,
Right.
So, and so there are some other claims that are made by people who employ the intermittent fasting about cardiometabolic effects and such. But I think ultimately, people fast for different reasons. People fast for religious reasons, per se.
Yep.
But I think ultimately, insofar as they work mainly for the same reason, is that it's they're accumulating caloric deficits in different ways, right?
Yeah.
So the question really is, I mean, any of these strategies can work. The question is, at what costs, and what are the drawbacks, right? So are you the type of person that after 8 hours of fasting, that you come out of the other end and you just feel like ravenous and just feel like you want to consume everything, right?
Yeah.
So we all fast in some way, right? So when you eat dinner, let's say you eat dinner at, I don't know, 8 o'clock or something.
Yeah.
And then you hang around for a couple hours and you go to bed and you get up at 7 a.m. Well, you just fasted. You just fasted for 10, 11 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why when you get up, the first thing on your mind is food, breakfast, right? So that's basically fasting, right? So, you don't eat when you sleep.
Yeah.
So the strategy, a strategy can work. I think each person has to come to their own conclusion individually, at what cost, and is it going to work for me, and can I sustain it for the long term?
Yeah. Sometimes I find myself, after fasting and having a big meal, I'm a lot more tired after the meal, and whether I take a nap or just power through it, is there a benefit, or is there some way around that? And maybe the answer is just not fasting in smaller food amounts in different time increments. But is there a way? I mean, everybody talks about the Thanksgiving hangover, food hangover. Is there a way around that, or is it kind of just you're eating too much? Or
Yeah, no. I think that's what you're talking about. The Thanksgiving hangover, right? So you consume a bunch of calories, and then immediately after, you just feel like you want to just crash, right?
Yeah.
I think you if you wanted to employ a strategy that works, right, you wouldn't have that big crash, that big Thanksgiving crash, if you had your brunch, your breakfast or your brunch, and then your dinner or your snack, right? So healthy foods, simple foods, right? You're you're controlling the distribution of your intake throughout the day with healthy foods.
Right.
And that's primarily the way that I think people should employ a strategy that you can sustain, avoid those big crashes, right? So you think about it, right? So after you get up in the morning and then you have your breakfast or your brunch, right? The first thing that you want to do oftentimes is take a nap afterwards. Right. So maybe the solution that people can employ is to consume and healthy foods in regular intervals, and perhaps that would mitigate the possibility that you just feel like you just want to have a nap after having one gigantic meal at one point in time.
I ask because I'm kind of rethinking it now that I'm going through all this, which is, it's good to have you on and get some expert advice. But I do, Tony, want to switch to the endurance side of things. And talk a little bit more about, one, the world record, two, your marathon times, and three, I got a couple more questions on what might be coming next for me. Selfishly, I do want to run things by you, but let's start with the world record. So for those listening, Tony is the world record holder for fastest indoor Ironman. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I got that right. And so what drove you to say you wanted to do that? What was your mindset going into it? And how did you make sure that you actually did break the record, kind of thing?
Yeah, well, it started out with working with my local Y here in Boston, the Oak Square YMCA. And then we sort of started doing this indoor Ironman as a neat little fundraiser. And the fundraiser was for the YMCA annual fund, which gives economic support for families in need, people who maybe single mothers or people who don't have the economic ability to pay for health and wellness programs, after school programs. That fund basically funds the community and gives out money to people. And so we started doing this indoor Ironman as just a way to fundraise. And a couple thousand people walk through the door of a YMCA. And so we said, hey, let's just do this. We'll market this indoor Ironman event, and then people will come in and donate to it. And then we'll raise money for the annual fund. And I did it. We started it, and it was just it was a fun thing to do. And we mapped out the swim, all of 25-yard pool, 170 lengths in the pool. We brought in the indoor bike, the trainer. I had my bike on the trainer, did 112 miles on the bike, and then had the treadmills set up to do treadmill marathon. And people came in throughout the day and donated, and we raised thousands of dollars for it. And it just, one day I was talking to one of the directors at the Y. I was like, I wonder if they have a Guinness World Record for this. And they said, yeah, I don't know, we should check. So I checked, did the research, nothing. There was no record. So finally, I had to go through an entire process with Guinness World Record to even get it approved as a Guinness World Record. And then, so that took several years, actually. And then finally, once we got it approved, they said, okay, you can do it as a record, but you can't just do it and get a record. We're going to set a standard time that you would have to start to do it, because since it's new, there's no existing record. So we're going to set a standard for that, and it's not going to be easy. So they set the standard. First, they set it at 8 hours. It's like, wow, pro athletes
Yeah.
do that, right? And then later on, they dropped it down to 9. After several attempts of trying to do it. There were several failed attempts. I forget how many failed attempts there were I had, but eventually in 2018, I ended up doing it, right? And it was in 2018, it was just a lot of learning. It was a lot of learning from all of the failed attempts.
Yeah.
And that was really the key to actually doing it, right? And the bike really is, so we figured out that the resistance on the bike, there was no stipulation really, and that's really why it's even doable for me, because the bike leg, for the record, there's no stipulation on resistance. So we said if we keep the resistance, say, or the wattage, really, the watts, the amount of work you're doing on the bike, if we keep the wattage under 200, and and then they said, okay, what if we keep the wattage under 180? And then, okay, what if we keep the wattage under 150? And then it was that trial and error process that led me to, okay, what does the wattage need to be on average so that I would be able to hit an 8-hour?
Yeah.
And so we kept the wattage, basically under 200.
Okay.
And that was enough for me to be able to hit that record.
Yeah.
And that was done in 2018.
Huh.
And so for now,
Yeah.
no one has tried to, from what we know of, try to beat it. I'm sure someone will eventually.
How you think? I might be coming for it.
Absolutely. I'll help you do it. That would be a good story.
Hey man, I'd love that. Wow.
Raise
So nobody has
money for a good cause. And then, and there's actually 3 records. There's one with a 25-yard pull, one with a 25-meter yard pull, and then one with a 50-meter pull. So people can go after each one. I have the one with the 25-yard pull. So there's actually 3 records.
Okay.
And then male as well as male, female.
Yeah. And how fast were you running the marathon? How fast was that treadmill going?
The winning one ended up, I think it was a sub 4? It might have been almost a sub 4-hour marathon.
Okay.
But I knew, right? Because look, I was like, I'm not a pro athlete. So the wattage on that bike is gonna have to be low enough for me to do a sub 4. And that was part of the trial and error. I actually learned a lot by going through that process. I learned a lot that I used to factor into training today, just from doing that. The amount of work that you have to do on the bike in order to run off the bike at a certain pace, that's tricky science. And you got to get that down if you want to hit a certain goal, right? And so I used that now to figure out the training process for people who are trying to qualify for Kona, people that are trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon. How do you get a body to move at a certain pace at a certain time, right? And it's all interesting science.
Yeah. And so what I'm picking up and what I'm hearing you say a little bit is that the bike it's important to kind of almost take it easy on the bike. Is that right? Like,
I mean, if you can, because the amount of work that you do on the bike will significantly impact the amount of work that you can do when you run off of the bike. And so oftentimes many people on the listeners will recall being at a spectator at an IronMan event, and you look back, all you see is people walking.
Right.
When you see, it almost looks like an army of walkers on the run.
Yeah.
And when you see that, oftentimes it's because people spent too many pennies on the bike. They could not control the desire to pass people, put it in the big ring on your left and pass people and get in front. And they couldn't control that desire. And as a result, they spent too many pennies on the bike, and then they end up walking on the run.
Yeah.
And so that's where the secret is with Ironman racing, is that you have to control that effort on the bike so that you can back into the speed that you think that you can run off the bike at that bike effort.
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think I needed to hear that.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get into it as we approach.
Amen,
Waco.
man, amen. I can't wait. And now a couple last minute questions before we wrap this up.
Yep.
The first being, have you ever considered UtraMan, or had anybody?
Yeah. So that, I mean, UtraMan, even ultramarathon, many people have asked that, would I ever see, I never say never.
Yeah.
I never say never on any of the ultras, but I haven't dabbed my toe into any of the UtraMan or ultramarathon. There is something that I want to do called the 777, which is the 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. That is something that I think that I would absolutely love to do, and that's a pretty big penny just to get into that.
Yeah.
But UtraMan, never say never, but right now probably not for a bit. Right. So basically, for people who don't know, UtraMan is basically, what is it? Basically an Ironman. What is it? 2 or 3 times the Ironman distance over a couple of days.
Yep. Yeah.
So
would you ever coach somebody to one?
I'd be interested in coaching somebody for it. That would be interesting. The knowledge that I'd garner from it would be interesting. But we'll see. Maybe someday.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about it. I'm thinking about what's next, Tony. So it's crazy.
Well, you're such a great athlete. I think so. People either go in 2 directions. They either go in the direction of, okay, I want to do more, which is ultra stuff, right? Ultra long, ultra marathon, UtraMan stuff. They either go longer, or they say, I just want to go faster.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, because you're such a great athlete. I think you could go into the faster realm, keep doing it in the marathons and the Ironman, and Kona qualifier.
Hey, come on.
Boston Marathon qualifier. 70.3 worlds. This is the stuff that, right? Because longer takes more time. Going faster is, the same time that you've done, but trying to do it harder and with more performance, which can also be another challenge.
Right. Well, yeah, I've thought about both sides. It's funny you mentioned that. So we'll be talking more about that too.
Nice.
But let's wrap this up. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I will ask you, one, what is your marathon time these days? I heard 4 hours on the Boston Marathon. Is that the fastest? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I've done in peak physical condition when I was your age. I would do I've done in the high 3s. 314-ish, 315, 313-ish. And these days, I'm more of recreational. I'll jump an event. I've done 16 consecutive Boston marathons. This year will be 17. Oftentimes I jump in events as a recreational athlete, and I don't do nearly as much training as I used to do. And that's because when you start to coach, and certainly do what I'm doing, which is build out a coaching platform, which it's a lot of work. And so you have to really realize that being both a coach and being both a competitive, high performing athlete, those 2 things begin to diverge, right? Because you can't, the old saying is, when you try to do too many things, you end up doing none of them well. So, my main focus is helping other athletes and athletes, incredible athletes like yourself, and helping other people qualify for the Boston Marathon and do Ironman in 70.3s.
Yeah.
And these days, most of the time, I'm really happy being more recreational, and not have to deal with the psychological burnout. Right. I mean, I'm almost approaching 100 marathons before the age of 50. So there is the the psychological burnout factor that happens when you train so hard for so many years consistently. And I've been very mindful of that. I don't want that to happen. So oftentimes I'm like, I'm happy bringing the volume back and bringing the training down, and just going out and doing a 4-hour marathon, and jumping in an event here and there, being a recreational athlete, and still do it and have the time to be able to run a coaching platform. So
right. Well, I love it, and I'm grateful for your coaching abilities, because you've opened my eyes, and I wasn't this athlete before I started, I'll tell you that much. So
yeah, you're gonna do some incredible things. I'm glad. I don't know if it was you found me or I found you, but I'm glad it happened, because
hey man, and I'll tell you, I was about to give up on the Ironman dream before he called me. It was a Monday, and I remember it distinctly back in April, man. So yeah, it's a divine alignment if you ask me, but we won't go too much into that. But yeah, let's give this thing a wrap up. How can people help you out? How can people find you? I know I have some Ironman hopefuls in my back pocket, so I'd be happy to send them your way.
Yep, you can find us on Twitter, Event Horizon. I think on Twitter, Event Horizon TV. On Instagram, Event Horizon .tv, on Facebook, Event Horizon.tv. And if you want to check out, email me directly, you can email me at contact@eventhorizon.tv.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tony. I appreciate your time, and yeah, let's get into the good stuff.
All right.